Pick a day. In fact, pick any day, it doesn't really matter, because any day you pick, there will be a slew of attacks on Jeremy Corbyn and eerie silence when it comes to what the Conservative Party is actually doing. And when the media does actually do its job and calls out people on the right, the Conservative Party, they tend to brush over it as quickly as possible. The newest slew, in fact, a repeating offender for Jeremy Corbyn, is anti-Semitism. The facts are very clear about this. Anti-Semitism has dropped in the Labour Party since Jeremy Corbyn took over. Jeremy Corbyn has been to plenty of temples. He has marched with people of the Jewish faith against anti-Semitism, yet you still have friends of Israel coming out and condemning Jeremy Corbyn, although personally I suspect it's because Corbyn actually wants peace between Israel and Palestine, and as I've said before, the Israeli government led under Benjamin Netanyahu does not want peace between the two people. He just wants to exterminate Palestinians. But I find it odd and infuriating that the media, and in fact friends of Israel, say nothing about Boris Johnson. This is a man who actually met with a well-known neo-Nazi. In fact, when you actually look at the statistics, anti-Semitism in the Conservative Party has skyrocketed. And it's not just anti-Semitism in the Conservative Party, it's also Islamophobia. It's also homelessness. Yes, I'm about to get into some of the horrid atrocities committed by the Conservative Party that the media just isn't really covering. So, since 2010, and this is an obscene percentage number, but it is legitimate, homelessness has gone up by 169%. 4.1 million children have been forced into poverty since the Conservatives took over. Now, you can put this entirely at Theresa May, or you can recognise that Esther McVey has done a large portion of that damage. Speaking of Esther McVey, we have a little bit of win from the Job Centre, from DWP, as they've now admitted that they will have to pay £2 million back to at least 400,000 JSA claimants. This is a small win, but it is a win. Of course, Esther McVey is not going to reform her system. She has been defending it, despite what the facts have said, ever since she implemented the thing that only seems to punish the non-wealthy. And I say non-wealthy because with the gap of austerity that the Tories have enforced on the country, it's very, very difficult to make a living in this country if you're not wealthy. It used to be you'd have the struggling poor, you'd have those that get by, you'd have the middle classes, and then you'd have the wealthy. Unfortunately, unless you've got a few millions in the bank, you have serious financial worries in your life. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We also have a government, I can't believe I have to say this, but we have a government who get rid of rent-controlled areas. The Chope Geezer, who refused to make upskirting illegal, is also known for getting rid of rent control, which means a landlord can simply jack up the rent whenever they feel like it. This is something that can be devastating, especially when you take into consideration that local council tax has gone up and up. And of course, what we get has gone down and down. Whether Theresa May was Home Secretary or whether it was Amber Rudd, the police service has been gutted. So has the fire department. In fact, Boris Johnson's somewhat moronic statement of, we don't need as many firefighters because we're focusing more on preventative measures, is something that sticks out, and it seems to be the pin-up of the Conservative Party, despite the fact that it doesn't work. And yet Sajid Khan gets endless amounts of criticism because he's Muslim. Sajid Davis, while we're on a list of deplorables, is a man who stepped in to fill the gap that Amber Rudd covered for Theresa May's mistake. Of course, I'm referring to Windrush. Now, it's not bad enough that Theresa May, and it was ultimately down to Theresa May, she was Home Secretary when this happened, it was her department that did this. It's not bad enough that a slew of British citizens, people who were here legally, were made illegal immigrants because, well, I was about to say because of an incompetency, but let's face it, destroying documents is not incompetent, it is malicious, vile, and blatantly racist, as it was only those who came from Jamaica. But Sajid Davis, was the man who was meant to fix this. He was the man who was taking this seriously. He was going to come in like a white knight in an old medieval movie and save the day. And what's he done? Well, he's now offered to fast track a number of people's claims to get them back into the UK if they are willing to sign a gag order. That's right. You can come back into the country that evicted you because of corrupt, repulsive, racist politicians that are in the Conservatives, not in Labour. But of course you will never be able to speak about the experience. Let's keep it hush-hush. Bad for morale, isn't it? Then of course we look at what the Conservatives are doing in terms of voting. Now this is a direct tie to human rights, you know, that thing that Conservatives are always telling us that they want to get rid of, and yet some people still think we're a civilized country, they wouldn't get rid of human rights. Well, it's happening. When it comes to voting in the last local election, a number of polling stations forced people to show voter ID. I've said before how silly this is, but I'll go into it once again. In order to steal someone's vote, you need their full name, you need their full address, and you need to find out which polling station they have. And then you need to hope that that person doesn't actually turn up. Because if they do, well, the whole thing's thrown out. We have a pretty damn good system. By forcing people to take ID with them, well, you're punishing people that, first off, might not have ID. I mean, let's face it, if you don't drive, if you don't smoke, if you don't drink, you wouldn't need to buy ID. And if to get something like a passport is 70 to 80 pounds, well, considering that a huge majority of the country live in poverty, that's not exactly something they can afford. Same with the driver's license and any other form of photo ID that isn't being given, but yet we're being told that we need it to vote. The latest one, the story that I read, in fact 2 days ago, which I found the BBC oddly quiet about, was that the Conservatives are now redefining the country, reallocating seats and voting polling stations, Now, essentially what this means is they've learnt from the American Republicans, because gerrymandering is a serious issue when it comes to American politics. And what that means is, over here, if Labour and Conservative get the exact same amount of votes, the Conservatives, because of how they have reworked the country, will have a 40-seat advantage. This is an attack on democracy and is slowly stripping away human rights. One of those human rights is the right to vote. Do you genuinely think Jacob Rees-Mogg wants you to vote unless it's for the Conservative Party? This is a man who oozes unearned privilege with every single word. In fact, with the smug look on his face, knowing full well that people are starving to death in this country because of his party, because of Theresa May's actions, because of Boris Johnson's support. I know Boris Johnson's not the biggest supporter of Theresa May, but he's still part of the Conservative Party, and they all seem to have the same mandate: work for the rich, screw over the poor. Lancaster has now got the abhorrent issue of fracking to deal with, despite the fact that everyone in the local area campaigned against it. A report recently came out, again, a lot of recent reports. I could build my channel just on condemning the Conservatives. But the recent report comes out saying that fracking can cause air pollution. I think I can speak for the entire world when I say no shit. The only people who do not think that fracking causes air pollution, causes water pollution, makes the earth toxic, leads to an increase in earthquakes, are the people who ignore it. And the people who ignore it are Conservatives who take a lot of money by letting fuel companies do things like fracking. There is a reason why fracking will never take place near Chequers or any other multi-millionaire's home. It is because it is 100% toxic for the environment. Now, I know green policies aren't necessarily popular or a sexy topic to follow, but let's face it, one world, one chance. We fuck this up, we can't exactly go to Mars. But on to the final thing with the Conservative Party. And I'm only saying final thing because we're about 12 minutes in and there's still a lot more I could go through. The Conservatives at every point have gone out of their way to make life more difficult for anyone who is not a millionaire. Homelessness risen to 169%. That is inexcusable. Tory austerity has been proven and admitted to be completely manufactured. There was no need for it, and yet everyone who isn't a millionaire is suffering because of it. Constant tax breaks and redistribution to the wealthiest in the country mean that people like Boris Johnson can have a £30 million house that we have paid for, yet a family has to live on the street despite the fact that they have a job, because wages are so pathetically low that they cannot keep with inflation. Just because you work on minimum wage doesn't make it a livable wage. Esther McVeigh's new plan of forcing kids into a summer job, while I admit there is some merit to kids having a summer job, working for £2 an hour shows how grotesquely out of touch or simply uncaring the Conservative Party really is. Boris Johnson doesn't act in the best interest. While he was Foreign Secretary, didn't act in the best interest in the country. It was completely self-serving. He himself has admitted that in his mind, every single politician only does what is best for them. Only does what they think will have them being remembered favourably. He thinks that Winston Churchill only stood up against the Nazis because it means that history would remember him favourably. Despite the fact that most people in the Conservative Party at that time actually wanted to give in to the Nazi Party and appease Hitler rather than fight him. At every single point, the Conservatives show just how much disdain they have for the average person in the United Kingdom. And at every single point, BBC, ITV and even Sky News, especially Sky News now that it's owned by Rupert Murdoch, cover for them. Don't focus on the grotesque number of homeless people in the street. Don't focus that there are 4.1 million children living in poverty that do not have to be there. Don't focus on the school dinners that are being taken away from children, on the schools that are being closed down, on the police stations that are being closed down, on the preventable fires like Grenfell Tower that were 100% foreseeable and 100% ignored, that the survivors still don't have a place to go. Ignore all of that, because hey, Jeremy Corbyn didn't yell at a Holocaust survivor, so he must be anti-Semitic. There's a Muslim coming over the border. It's all their fault. It's not Theresa May making millions upon millions of starving children. It's the people fleeing a war-torn country. It's the man who would actually bring change. There is a very clear bias in this country when it comes to the media. I think we all need to remember that next time BBC gets turned on.